Hello everyone and welcome to, I think it is our 6th webinar we've done during this period. Before I make a start, can everyone please just raise their hand to say that they can hear me and see my screen? Perfect. Right, so this webinar, I'll be covering the second phase of our searching journey. The 2 weeks ago, I think we went through searching, configuring it and setting up some elements. So today I want to focus on a bit more usability. I want to pick up on some of the elements that I actually didn't go through last week that I mentioned in my PowerPoint, and I also want to then go through some pro tips. Okay. So first, last week we talked a lot about predictive search, Avanti search, and also the concept of enterprise search. I know a few of you actually went away and had a little play with some of these elements. So I will cover something I did notice about enterprise search that came up from one of our customers. But I will just go through a quick recap of predictive search and Avanti search, just so we're all familiar with how they are used within the business. So first, predictive search. We saw that was configured last week, and this is the ability to obviously type into any box and show any values that begin to start matching on my terminology. Now I think on this one I actually turned it off. Let me just try customer query. So here you can see here I'm able to start rendering objects or search results into my predictive search results. Now here this is entirely customizable as we saw last week, and in some of my pro tips I'm going to show you how you can enhance it and also how the images are embedded into the search. So I'll go through that a bit later. Again, this search is available in Avanti, and similarly we looked at the Avanti search. Let me just go on from that. Within Avanti, that allows you to create your own search criteria based on various things within your business. So within inventory query, I can see, for example, when I use the browsers, I'm given a search criteria on the left, which is entirely customizable. Now, one thing to note that I didn't mention last week, not all of these searches have been configured. If I look at something like bank query within Avanti and search, you'll notice no filters appear on the left, which indicates that the search hasn't been set up within Avanti. But no, not to worry, this can be done using the search criteria program that we covered last week by simply going in and adding a new filter for either the system, company or role or operator. Here you can look for your bank and bring in your own search criteria. And search on a particular column name and give it a control type of, say, combo box, save. And now you'll notice where bank wasn't previously available as a search criteria, once I browse on there, I'm now given my options to select from a list to filter down the list on the right. So again, where the search isn't set up, you can do that. So that is Avanti search. And finally, we covered enterprise search, which is a control that can be added to a screen and searched upon. So within purchase order or purchase stock code, which I set up, you're able to search for a particular item and find any open purchase orders for said item. Now, I did notice actually one of a support call put in about this following my webinar, and obviously this the limitation with enterprise search is it can only search on a single table. It doesn't have the concept of custom forms or linked tables. So that's a bit of a limitation, where predictive search and Avanti search, you don't have that problem. Okay, so enough of a recap. Let's hit where the two items that we didn't check off last week. So I showed you 2 weeks ago a way to access inventory movements using hyperlinks. Now I want to show you the bottom two in a bit more detail. So first of all, I'm looking at receipting a purchase order and how we can look at using hyperlinks to enable that process. So within my standard SYSPRO, I've actually designed an insight tile, which shows my open purchase orders. From here, I can search using the search bar within the list view, okay? I could search for a stock code, I could search for a supplier. It all depends on what's in this grid. So from there, I can then click on my hyperlinks and I can click on a customized smart link that I set up earlier. So let's have a little quick look at what that looks like. Here, I'm giving it a name of receipt. I'm running the receipt program and I'm passing it %key. Now that is the key that I'm clicking on, which is then being passed into the program to run it. So not all programs can be run like this, but the receipt one, for instance, can. So now I've searched for my particular stock code description, I can jump in and receipt a program. So if you have any issues in terms of warehouse staff wanting to find the purchase order because the documentation doesn't display it, they could search potentially by stock code or alternate stock code to find the purchase order that they need to book in against. So that's quite a little powerful trick. Now, the second one on my list was about linking to app builders. Now, within SYSPRO 7, I can't remember exact port it came out, they introduced the concept of app builder linkages. Now, what that means is I can actually utilize hyperlinks to link into an application builder. Now, those of you who are familiar with these application builders, they are basically a toolkit, which means we can create a program inside SYSPRO just using VB scripts to do a business task. So the one I've set up is very simple. It's literally just displays the item I clicked. So you can see how I could actually use this to actually run some applications. So every time my 1068 is now passed into my 1068 parameter, which I can then use further in my program to do an action on a purchase order. So again, it's talking about taking your insight tile into a program and doing said action on it. We have a quick look at what the script looks like within that. And this is very simple stuff. All I'm doing is passing the field value of a system variable called app builder linkage, and then I can use that within my application. So again, that can be used for many use cases, depending on what you use application builders already for in the business. But again, taking from A to B in the most seamless manner possible. And one little thing to highlight, I also added a field called stock code just to highlight the ability to also use predictive searches within application builders or form fields or grid views, which means you can obviously then use this as your browsers rather than having to go through a standard browse within SYSPRO. Okay, so I've gone through that. So I want to use most of this session to talk about the pro tips element, okay, and what's been introduced in SYSPRO 7 and also in SYSPRO 8. One thing I find really handy that they've introduced is the always on ribbon bar. Okay, you can see here in an insight, this is actually always displaying. You get the ability to search within a list view. But if I go into a program, say inventory query and inventory movements, by default, sometimes this search bar is off, okay? If I have a quick look at how I've got this configured, within my cogs menu against the operator, I've now got this new option to show always on. So that means my list view toolbar will always be displaying no matter what the list view is, unless I've overridden it otherwise. That means I can obviously, all the operators don't need to remember to actually show that particular bar, which is really powerful because what that search is doing, it's searching within the entire grid and filtering down. So when I run my stock code, if I search for any number like 207, it'll show a row where that matches. So that can then, by setting that setting on, I can display that without having to go through the case of right-clicking, customize, and show list view toolbar for every single operator. So that was a nice little feature SYSPRO introduced. CTRLF. This is very similar to what we're seeing here, and it's just a quick jump into that search. I can actually use this within the program list, which I use all the time. So CTRL-F will engage my filter text, and within there, I can search for my particular program and operate it. This is exactly the same as using this toolbar up here, just accessed slightly differently. If I do CTRL-F, you'll notice the focus moves to the toolbar at the top. So again, a really handy little hint. Now, what I typically use this for within a program, say Image Query or stock code setup, if I'm looking at the help file using F1, I can do a show a single file, or in SYSPRO 8 for the new help, you'd have to open up all groups. So I move to my SYSPRO 1, my SYSPRO 7 version, I can do show a single file, CTRL-F, and then look for the particular field within my view. And then that will allow me to find what that particular field might mean. So in setup programs, that's a really quite a powerful tool to find the information that you want, and something I use all the time. Browse windows. Again, this is a very simple one. A lot of you will use these already. The simple right-clicking the SYSPRO programs and including category browses gives you a whole host of folders, new folders within the program list called the browses. Now these are useful and more commonly used on the browse for jobs. But what's useful is it actually gives you some functions that you wouldn't otherwise have if you're going through the browse on a query window, such as copy or delete. Sometimes they are quite commonly grayed out, but if you go through the browses option, you get those options and it allows you to do a bit more interaction with what you're trying to achieve. So again, like a nice little program list that is hidden by default that I would always recommend you show. Quicklaunch. Now, if anyone's ever had Jeris on site, she will always use this. And this is quite simply within any program, you can press F8 and it'll bring up your favorites menu. And then that can be used to launch into other programs, inventory movements, anything that you want that you've put onto your favorites, which allows you to obviously go through more windows. So if you are using a dual monitor, you can obviously move this across and run a window on there as well. It also gives you access to some of the queries at a glance, quick find, a very old search mechanism which allows you to search for things using this criteria. So again, same sort of use cases before, searching for a stock code within the purchase orders that are open. I was able to find the same purchase order. So again, the F8 is very useful for being able to jump between screens. At a glance, again, these are quite commonly used programs, but worth noting. Within the query in the ribbon bar, the at a glance allows you to go into particular things like your inventory valuation without having to run a full-on crystal report. So within here, you can actually run that and it'll be much quicker and it'll just display in a grid, which you can then search or run a export to Excel. So the various ones of these, which can be accessed again through the F8 menu I showed you before, or from query and at a glance, you can then run various things to help balance submodules back to the GL without having to run copious reports. It's nice, quick and easy. Multimedia. Now, this one is quite handy. You'll notice throughout my system, when I'm using things like Avanti for stock codes, or even Espresso, images are displaying, okay? Now, you'll also notice that if you've ever on the system admin course, this is also, you'd see this. So if I run my A100, my images are displaying. How to set that up, and then obviously this is all about making it more easy to search on. You know, an image can speak 1,000 words. If I quickly go into my inventory setup, actually this is better through inventory query, this one. You'll notice I've got the multimedia buttons at the top. Now I can edit them to be a default location. Now, I think let me just run onto a stock code. I've got things called default, and I can set for each category here, I can set a default location. So for my bitmap graphic, I'm looking at the media path, which happens to be my C drive, SYSPRO, Media, and the key, which is passed from the stock code. For my drawings, I've actually got my media path and the drawing column from within my particular stock code. So if I fill that field in, I can use that within the object multimedia. Now, what does that enable me to do? I can click on them. I can open a PDF. I can open a link to an external SharePoint site quite simply by using the multimedia. I can also right-click the stock code field, which will then enable this option here to show bitmap graphics, which can then obviously be resized to make it a bit more visible within inventory query. So once I've set up my defaults, that is present for every stock code. Now I can actually point multimedia to a specific file, but using the defaults, and if you've got a common structure within your paths, you can then bring in every image. And then these are also then accessible throughout the system within Espresso, within Avanti, and if I want to click on my multimedia object, I can get it from things like here. Obviously, if it's not set up, it won't find it. I look for my A100 where it is set up. I'm able to find my images and again link back to my drawing. So again, quite a little tip for getting your multimedia set up and into SYSPRO, which then you can use it throughout the system. And by default, like I say, it's used within Avanti. Finally, this is a very useful one, and I've done this using Insights. If you've got multiple companies within SYSPRO, you might want to be able to see inventory stock levels from said other companies. So you can either put in intercompany requests for them to be transferred, or lodge a sales order on another company. Whatever the reason, Insight tiles actually allow that to be quite simply achievable. So if I look at my A100 in this instance, I've set up a web view, and this is actually looking at my SYSPRO company Edu8 company. Now I'm logging in company R, and that's giving me the warehouse record from there, which tells me I have 32 on hand. While in this particular one, in total, I've got 136 on hand in total. So using Insights, I can actually create tiles that look across companies. Now let me show you how that's quickly set up. So this is my Insight tile. I've actually done this dynamically. So within there's a company parameter. And from there, I'm actually able to inject the company from the tile into this variable and pull it from that database. So when I set this up, all I had to do was type in the database name, and I can use the same tile then throughout the system without having to create, company Edu1 tile, company Edu2 tile. I was able to use the same tile with the same content, but just literally pass it a parameter, which is the database name. So, and again, that could be used in sales order entry to see what stock I have on hand. Or it could even be used for jobs, sales orders, or purchase orders if you want to be able to query data from other companies. So if you do intercompany, you want to see the sales order on the other side of the fence, you can use Insight tiles to do that and access data within SYSPRO that otherwise wouldn't be present. So that kind of concludes today in terms of using search and some 8 pro tips that I've put together there, and obviously enhancing it and using the other options available to you. If you have any questions, please put them into the panel and I'll happily answer. And I hope that's been useful for you. Or feel free to email me after. Thank you very much, guys. Okay, no questions. So if you do come up with anything, feel free to email and we'll happily answer. Thank you all for attending, and I hope it's been useful.